I'm a senior at Sitka High School, or just graduated, and I've been studying renewable energy in Sitka for the last semester, and that's basically my only experience with that until this year. I haven't done much renewable energy stuff, so just to start this off, it's definitely, I'm not an expert at this, and I'm not incredibly knowledgeable. I've just been doing this for this one semester, and there's tons of people in this audience who are so much more knowledgeable than I am, and such, like I know Dean Oberson and lots of other people who are, have done so much on this, and yeah, I'm just gathering what I can, and what else I would have. So yeah, this is my presentation, Beyond Blue Lake. Yeah. So to start off, I'll just go with some electrical general terminology, just so it's not super confusing. So just instantaneous electricity, or just the normal electricity that you're used to, is measured in watts. So like if you have a 60-watt light bulb, that's how much electricity it's using at one time, and then electricity over time is in watt hours. So if you have a 60-watt light bulb for 1 hour, it would use 60 watt hours. And then going up from there, if you have a kilowatt, that's 1,000 watts, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts, and a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. An average house uses about 11 megawatt hours per year, for some context, and it draws roughly 1.2 kilowatts at any given time. And then Sitka as a whole, like as an entire community, we used 114 gigawatt hours last year and draw roughly 15 megawatts at any given time. And that can go up, like I think the highest it's gotten is around 25 megawatts this last winter. So that's just some general knowledge. So I'll start off with the past of Sitka's generation. So just basically broad going over what renewable stuff we have had for electricity generation in our past up to now. So our first major renewable infrastructure was the dam, the Blue Lake Dam, and Blue Lake was first dammed in 1913, and then had a series of, I think that dam, it was sold to the city, and then it was knocked out in a flood, and then the large dam, that's the bottom of the dam that we know now, was built, finished in 1960, and that one, as you can tell, it's lasted for 60 years, so it's been here for a long time. And we originally had our powerhouse, had 2 turbines that could go up to 7 megawatts of capacity, and that was expanded in 2014, as you probably well know, for around $150 million. And now has a 15.9 megawatt capacity, and that is technically expandable to 21.42 megawatts. And there are some more specifics that you can talk to Dean about that. And then going on to the Green Lake. The Green Lake Dam was planned in 1974, and it came online in 1982. And the cost that they had placed on, the only cost that I've been able to find was $136 million for installing that. And that has a 16.5 megawatt capacity. But it is a much smaller lake, so it cannot make as much electricity over the year as Blue Lake can. And then we also have the Blue Lake River plant, which was installed in 2014, along with the normal Blue Lake one, and that has a 1.625 megawatt capacity. So along with all that, we're pretty much set up to have 100% renewable power. And so, and I will say there is some of that stuff that I'm gathering this from the internet mostly, so some of that is not entirely accurate. It should be taken with a grain of salt. Like, don't quote me on all this stuff, but it should be pretty accurate. One of the most interesting things that I found through the research that I've done this year was this 1974 analysis of electric system requirements that we did right before decided to get the Green Lake Dam. And so at the time, they had a big oil boom, and there was, or a big oil crisis, and there was a big need for new generation. And the cost of, they were debating whether they would build a Green Lake Dam or the Tackett Dam, and which I feel like a lot of people are not, some people probably have heard of the Tackett Dam, and I don't think a lot of us realize that even at this time in 1974, they were looking at both of these dams and comparing which one would be worth it at that time. And the Tackett Dam was simply, at that time, just seemed like too large an investment for them to build right then. And so they chose for the Green Lake Dam and built that instead. And it had about half as much capacity as the Tackett Dam would. And so for some context for that too, this is also from the same report. Here you can see that the diesel alternative was pretty much unacceptable. Like that would have cost so much money over time for them to go with diesel instead of moving on to a new renewable project, even though it is a large upfront cost. Because the cost that you see here, even though it was $130 million, what we're paying off is the loan, and that is relatively small compared to the price of diesel, and you're getting a dam with it, versus diesel, you're just paying for diesel. Yeah. And that dam has lasted us for a long time. So here's another one, them projecting the growth over time from 1974, and this ended up to be actually relatively accurate. As you can see, this is where we are now with our usage, and that blue line is how much we're generating right now. So instead of building Tacketts like they expected we would, we expanded the Blue Lake Dam, and that has filled that gap for us. But it did not go exactly as they planned, or as this projects that it would. Also, an interesting thing to note is you can see that when they built the Green Lake Dam, they had way excess generation. They were generating way more than they needed at that time, but they did it because they expected that to come up in the future. So it was kind of a shot in the dark, and it ended up paying off really, really well for Sitka, because now we have all this power. Like, that's so much more that we would have, if they had just gone for what they needed at that time, we would not have what we have now. And so this is just a graph of how much energy we've used over the years, starting in 1973, and so you can see we follow that curve that they had estimated pretty well, and the pulp mill actually used a lot, so it gave them some extra revenue paying for that dam. And then around 2008 is when we were looking at, or starting to go through the process of building the Blue Lake Dam, and you can see that that steady growth was kind of continuing, and it looked like it was going to continue past then, and I think they were projecting like 1% growth a year, and then it kind of dwindled out and has stabilized, but it's looking like it's going up again. And part of the reason for why that's dwindled out is here's a graph of crude oil prices over time, and you can see every time there's been a large increase in a large dam built in Sitka, it has been after one of these large price hikes in crude oil. So you can see, like, Green Lake Dam is very obvious, and then Blue Lake Dam is the same kind of thing. Like, the oil prices were going way up, and the people who were, a lot of people were starting to buy electricity really quickly. And then you can see this graph ends in 2015, but you can see that's the price right now. It's also pretty high. We're also kind of starting to run out. Yeah. And let that decrease there is part of the reason why it was so difficult, or it's been so difficult for us to manage the electric budget with the Blue Lake Dam loan payments that we make. So, moving into the present, this is our current electric mix. So right now, all this blue is, well, up to this red line is what we're using. So the blue is the hydroelectricity that we're generating from all of our dams. And then the red is interruptible power, so that's in like a lot of our city buildings and schools, we have interruptible power. So it's basically we give them a better rate and then we can shut it off anytime if we get to the point where we need to cut into that gap that we have there. And then as you can see at the bottom, very, very little of our electricity is diesel, like pretty much none. Now I think it's like 99.8 or something crazy, because we have to run our diesels every once in a while just to keep on going, but we barely use them at all. And everything in green is water that goes over the dam that could be used for hydropower, but is going over. And we've got a lot of that right now too. So yeah, here's our firm average and max generation. So our firm generation is 127 gigawatts average. And so firm is, I should clarify this, firm is, that's based on the lowest recorded rain event that we've had and how much generation we make on that that year. So I think that's sometime in the 1950s we got the amount of rain that we based that figure on. And the average is 158 gigawatt hours, and that's, actually, I might be wrong, I think this is the 10-year average, or this is based on a 10-year span, so the firm is based on the lowest in the 10-year span, I'm pretty sure. And then max 190. Actually, I correct myself again. Maybe it's not. But yeah, the max 190 is the most we've used, and obviously that's a lot higher than what we've been putting on load on the system. So electric department figures. The department debt is around $118 million right now, and I think we're paying around $8 million a year in debt services, which is a lot, but we're making do. And so our electric department revenue in 2021, which is the last year that we have like a full thing for us, we have $19 million in revenue and $20 million in expenditures, and I'm not entirely sure how that whole thing works. It's very confusing to me, but yeah, it seems like in the last few years we've been running at like a $1-ish million deficit. And their residential rates are 16 cents a kilowatt hour, pretty much 17 cents a kilowatt hour. And our cost for hydropower versus our cost of using generators is pretty extreme. Like generators are 3.5 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's using hydropower is way better than using generators, especially because when we're using our generators, all that money that we're fueling into it is going to diesel, which all that money is going out of Sitka. And so moving on, so our hydroelectric generators, we've got Green Lake, Blue Lake, and Blue Lake River right now. So Green Lake, 16.5 megawatts, 15.9, and then 1.2 or 1.625, so that's 34.025 megawatts of total generating capacity for the entire city. And of course, that's not like, if we did all of that for a prolonged amount of time, I believe our dams would not, we would run out of water. So yeah, that's like if we're doing a max of what we're drawing. So our diesel generators, we've got all these generators at Jarvis Street, and so we've got 4 old diesel generators. One of them has broken, and I think it's too much money to get new parts. So we've only got 3 right now, and those are 7 megawatts, and then we have a CAT generator, which is 4 megawatts, and a solar Titan 130 turbine, which is 15 megawatts. So that's 26 megawatts of total capacity. Okay. And then total energy use. So in the 2008 Future of Sitka Energy and Sitka report, in terms of BTUs used, and a BTU is a British thermal unit, and that's kind of just a unit of heat energy. And in terms of BTUs, hydroelectric only accounts for 25% of Sitka's total energy, roughly. So even though we are 100% renewable on our electrical grid, there are a lot of other sources of energy that come into Sitka, like gasoline and diesel and propane, that use a lot more, or burn a lot more, or have a lot more energy that Sitka is still using in fossil fuels. So even though we are 100% renewable, it is not actually 100% renewable in the entirety of Sitka. And then the vast majority of Sitka's energy is used for heating and transportation. Like you can see, like as far as CO2s go in this graph, you can see that marine transportation and road transportation are the vast majority. And then residential is probably primarily heating. Okay, so moving into the future. So the City and Borough of Sitka, our forecasted loads going into the future. This is from a 2018 report that I think we outsourced, and it's like the load report, or yeah. And in that they forecasted what the loads would look like in the future, and as you can see, with a pretty moderate growth, we're scheduled to go over our firm generation capacity, which is the top of that green, in the next few years. I think actually it says we run out right about where we are right now. And that obviously has not happened because we're a little bit below that right now, but still, we are right on that line, and things are only projected to go up, really. Yeah, because as things are getting more and more electric, that's where we're going. We're only really going up. Yeah, and so we've got, yeah. So things that you're doing in the future. So these are just kind of the things that really stuck out to me from what I was seeing. So the penstock of Blue Lake is currently unlined from when it was built, and so it has some rocks that are coming dislodged within the penstock, and those are kind of threatening to go into the turbines. So we have to keep the flow of the Blue Lake Dam to a lower point. So we're only able to really draw around 14 megawatts when we could actually draw around 15.9, because we don't want to get these rocks into the system. And this isn't a huge threat to our system, because we have engineers who have told us that we're not going to pull rocks into the system if we keep it below this rate. But if we want to grow and use the actual full capacity of our system, it would be nice to have that line, especially with some of the stuff I'll be talking about later. That would be really useful. So yeah, and then road accessible transmission line from Blue Lake, bypassing the difficult to reach Heart Lake line. That probably has an actual name I'm not aware of, but there's a line that goes from Blue Lake over to, it goes from the Blue Lake powerhouse and then over through Heart Lake area. You can see it there. It's like the tree line's really high up, and those lines are pretty darn vulnerable right now, because if they got taken out, we only have a handful of linemen that can work on that, and so we could be out for a long time, and that's our connection to both of our hydropower plants. So especially if that happened like sometime in the winter, then we only have so much diesel generation, and it's really expensive. And so we would be paying a lot of money and losing a lot of possible income for those hydroelectric plants. And so that's super important, I think, going into the future, that we get that wrapped around on the road system. And then new substation out HPR, as there's more developments out HPR, the substation would mean that we could extend the 69,000 volt lines out HPR, so we have more capability for power distribution out there, and we could possibly sell power to the cruise ships and just power new developments. So that's something I've heard come up a few times. And then also just electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I was just talking to a guy from Juneau just a little bit ago who facilitated their charging infrastructure. And so I know through the new infrastructure bill, I guess we're going to get one new charger and stuff like that, especially for buses. I know in Juneau they have, I think they got like $10 million for new electric buses, and they've got already one installed. And so if we want to do stuff like that in Sitka, we would need some new charging infrastructure and to figure out where that is and how we're going to power that. And then there's just a lot of other things that I've heard about. Just I think a lot of our power poles, a lot of our just infrastructure is like around 50 years old from when Green Lake happened, and just a lot of the stuff is gonna need replacing as time goes on. But that's more basic stuff. So SEARHC is expanding in the next few years, and they have estimates for how much additional load they would put on the system that have ranged from 10 gigawatt hours per year to 43 gigawatt hours per year. From what I've heard, like I talked to the senior power plant operator, he said he didn't believe that the 43 gigawatt hours per year figure was even remotely possible. But I'm not sure that's what they've given us, and those are pretty rough estimates. But nonetheless, whatever happens is going to be a large addition to our system. So whatever SEARHC expansion happens, it's going to significantly impact the longevity of our system. And if what we have right now will keep us away from diesels for, say, 5 years or 20 years or whatever, even less, is largely dependent on this as SEARHC expands. And it will likely necessitate a new undersea intertie from Jarvis Street substation, so a new cable going under the water from kind of off the beach there, and then all the way around under to Japonski. And in late March, the senior project manager responded to an email from me, and she said, currently we are still in the design process of determining building sizes, as well as what systems will be on the building. I do not have that information nailed down yet, referring to the total load, and I think it will be a few months before we make decisions on the major mechanical and electrical systems, which will give us an idea of the energy draw. And I responded to that email, or followed up today, and she said that they still do not have the information. So it might be a little bit until we know how much information, or how much draw there will be, but that is very important stuff for the city to know and for the community to know, especially since a large part of it is what SEARHC will use for heating their buildings, which could fluctuate that number. It could change that number by like a large amount, because they could choose things that are 300% efficient for heating their buildings, or they could choose just resistance heating, which is 100% efficient. So there could be a large difference in what the draw is depending on what they choose. So that's important to keep in mind. So yeah, future loads in general. So this is a graph from that same 2018 report that puts in the SEARHC expansion. And as you can see, it really quickly goes over that average case hydro capacity. So that would be drawing into diesel generation really fast, and it would only grow. And so we would need, if we don't want to use diesels, then we would need something large very quick, if that estimate is true. And so, and I believe the average estimates like roughly a 1% increase in load. And so the Coast Guard is also expecting to expand and I believe get a new cutter. And so that would also be an additional addition onto the system load. And then just for fun, I added what would happen, what the load would be for different just things to get us off of gas. So like if we had 75% of our town having electric cars, which I think is like 3,500 electric cars, for some context, that would be 14.796 gigawatt hours per year. And that's an estimate from the Future of Energy in Sitka. And then if everybody did electric heating, that was with highly efficient heat pumps, that would be 51.42 gigawatt hours per year. So that's some more just context on how big of a load heating is. That's if it's has a heating factor, a capacity factor of 3. So just resistance heating would be around 150 gigawatt hours per year, which is more than our total electrical system uses right now. So heating is pretty big. And then electric boats, just kind of estimating it, would probably be another 15 gigawatt hours, but my guess is electric boats are a long ways out as far as, electric boats are a ways out. So then future load and production breakdown. So basically that's what we're producing now, and then on our load, what is expected, and so Coast Guard, that's what they've given us, and then electric cars and electric heating is right there too. Sorry, could I take a quick break? I'm gonna get some water. I'm feeling a little sick, so I'm gonna do a quick intermission real quick. Sorry. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, this is our electric future load breakdown, just with those extra additions, just for the heck of it. That will be a ways out, but that's what we should be shooting for, I think. So you can see that is above what even our max is. So we will need more electricity production if we want to meet that with renewables. Okay, so what are our options to do that? What are our options to lower our cap? That's our utopian Sitka. No, that was funny. So tactics. So this is a lake that obviously has been looked at for a long time as another option for Sitka. It's on pretty much the exact opposite side of Baranof Island. And it's, if you know where Baranof Orange Springs is, it's a little bit north of that. And it is smaller than Blue Lake and I believe Green Lake, but it is at a much higher elevation. It's over 1,000 feet. And that elevation gives us a lot more to work with as far as power goes, because the higher you get up, the amount of electricity you can generate from that pressure is a lot higher. So some of the options are kind of crazy. So I've talked to this stuff I didn't even realize was on the table, or at least being thought of, until I talked to Cord Christensen for the second time, like I guess a month ago. And he said that they've been looking into boring tunnels, which would be basically just long penstocks, or it would be one long penstock. And so some of the options would be either to bore a penstock, or I guess it would just be a tunnel to Blue Lake, and then to reinforce the Blue Lake generating capability, so it would flow into Blue Lake, and then we could just use the existing stuff at Blue Lake, or we could build an additional power plant there to use that excess power. And I believe that would also, that wouldn't quite use up you'd fully utilize the potential of having such a high altitude lake if we just used it to fill another lake at a lower altitude. But I guess, yeah. And then the other one is, the other option would be to do a penstock directly to somewhere in town, and then use that location to have a generation facility. And so they, I guess, Cord Christensen was saying that they have talked to people who are in part of large boring companies, and they have given them an estimate for some tunnel. I do not know which tunnel. Each of these is like, I think that green one's like 10 miles or something crazy like that. But they gave them an estimate for a tunnel at around $150 million, which seems kind of ridiculously cheap to me, just from what I've seen. like the boring company, I did like some just numbers, I should have put them up on here, but the like boring company that Elon Musk is doing, that's like around what they're saying they will do, like in like an optimal situation is to build like a 10-mile tunnel at $150 million. And so I would be very surprised if we could do that in Sitka, Alaska, in such a remote, crazy location right now. But it is definitely a potential option. And so another option, this is from that same 1970, so it's probably a little more developed now, or planned, but is to do a transmission line. And that is also wild because the transmission line across the island would include passing for glaciers and up and down mountains. Like if you ever cross the island, that corridor that goes through there is pretty treacherous, and so that would be quite the feat to take on, and not to mention building a power plant on the other side of the island and all the stuff that are entailed with making a new hydroelectric facility. So that would be quite a lot. And we've had, I think we had a feasibility study, I want to say 2014, I'm not entirely sure though, done on tackets, and it ultimately came out with the conclusion that unless we have a huge buyer, it's not going to be worth it to do in the near future. So how much would tackets cost, and how much would it add? And the answer is to both those questions, a lot. So an adjusted estimate from 2014 is $370 million, which is a lot of money if you factor in that, like the Blue Lake Dam was originally scheduled to cost just south of $100 million, so yeah, that the Blue Lake Dam expansion, I should say, and so that is a lot of money, and the yearly debt service payments for a 30-year loan would be in excess of $25 million, which is more than the current department revenue as a total. And as I said earlier in the thing, we're currently paying like $8 million in debt services, so $25 million is a lot. But then again, we would be paying off a dam that we would have for a long time. And it would add an additional 25 megawatts of generation, which is pretty close to our total generation currently. And it would add 87 gigawatt hours per year in capacity, which is a 30% increase on our capacity. So we would be completely fine for whatever type of increase happens to our system, but it would be a lot of money. So the price per kilowatt would be roughly 29 cents for that 30-year loan. And with that, it's interesting to think about, like, that would be 29 cents, that would be also, that would probably add on to what we have currently, but 29 cents is still less than the 35 to 40 cents that it costs for diesel generation. So even though it is a lot of money, there could be possibly a situation where it would be more financially worthwhile for us to pay the debt service on a massive project like this than to pay for diesel costs if our electricity demand keeps on going up. So yeah, wind energy. Moving on from hydroelectric. So wind energy is Cord Christensen, our generation systems manager, as I said earlier. He has said that he thinks wind energy is kind of their top other type of renewable energy that they're looking into. And so wind energy, from what I have heard and what I have also experienced just being around town, but yeah, what it seems like they're looking into is kind of this spot in these hills around this valley, also around Blue Lake. They're going to be looking at that for wind power, and then also up on Lucky Chance. And those are not the areas in town with the most wind. The areas in town with the most wind are pretty much on mountaintops, as you can see here on this graph of wind. you can see that the mountaintops of Sitka have tons of wind, but those are really hard to get to, obviously, and I don't think many people want a wind turbine right on top of Harvard Mountain, because they are also pretty darn loud, surprisingly. Yeah, and so a good, and just for our wind power rating, just in Sitka as a general, the Alaska Energy Department, or Alaska Energy, whatever the two other A's stand for, they did reports on a bunch of communities around Alaska, and so this is just their summary of Sitka, and they have our average power density for wind as 88, and our wind power class is 1, and our power rating as poor. And for some context, Kodiak has a pretty successful wind program. They also are 100% renewable energy powered, and these are some of their turbines, actually. They have them on Pillar Mountain, right above their town, so I'll actually point this out. So this is where they've got their wind turbines, and they've got 4 or 5 of them now, and each of them is like over a megawatt, maybe like 1.3 megawatts, so pretty substantial, and those are in obviously a perfect location. Like, you could not get better than that. It's like right next to town, there's a road to it, and it's in, like, if you can see the little key there, the blue is superb, so it's like the best you could possibly get. And we do not have many options like that in Sitka, but it is still a possibility, and there still are. There are also geological factors that will help wind in some locations, like if you've ever been to Blue Lake on a kind of windy day, when it's like not crazy windy in the rest of town, and then you just notice when you get up to Blue Lake, the wind just funnels through that valley, and so there's stuff like that where that might not be factored into the reports and the data that the Alaska Energy thing has. So there are still possibilities. And solar. So Sitka would not really think of being a huge solar perfect place to build, but it's surprisingly feasible, at least from what I've found. So the cost per watt of installed solar for just normal solar on the ground is 6 cents, or 60 cents to 80 cents per watt, and then floating solar, because I've been looking at floating solar just because it doesn't have a ton of like flat open ground, but we have reservoirs, and floating solar can handle quite a beating, and there are commercial applications that would work perfectly in Sitka lakes, and like you could put one in the Blue Lake Reservoir, and those cost $1 to $1.2 per watt, and with that, though, I am sure beyond a doubt that it would be more expensive in Sitka. How much more, I do not know. But just saying, for $1 per watt, a 30 megawatt solar installation costs roughly $30 million. And so for some context, 30 million megawatts, if you remember from earlier, the entire town has a total generating capacity. At one time, we can generate around 32 megawatts. So that could power the entire town twice over, and we draw like 15 megawatts at once on average. So it could power the entire town twice over for full sun. Obviously, this is not realistic. Like, it would be way too much power. It would be probably quite dangerous to have that much power that we're not using. And so that's not something that we do, obviously. But it's interesting to think about that compared to all of the hundreds and hundreds of $millions we've spent on our dams. Solar is quite cheap, but there are lots of caveats to that, because although it is quite cheap, in a year that same 30 megawatt system, even though it's rated for 30 megawatts in full sun, there's not full sun all the time. Like with my solar system, I've gotten them up to their rating a few times, but the vast majority of the time, they are not at their full capacity. Like, I think on average, solar farms only work to their full capacity around 27% of the time, like on average in the entire US of all the installations. 27% of the time they're working to their full rated potential. So, so even though it is technically 30 megawatts, we're only getting that at some times. And as I have on that other bullet point, we supply way too much in the summer and definitely not enough in the winter. Oh, I wrote that completely wrong. Whatever, as I tried to say. And so in a year, we would only produce 20 gigawatt hours compared to the over 120 gigawatt hours we get from hydro. That's consistent and that we can draw from and change up as we like, versus solar where we're at the whim of the sun. And so solar is obviously much more variable than hydropower. And Fairbanks is interesting. So Fairbanks is leading Alaska in solar right now. And we have nearly, I did not finish that this morning, we have nearly the exact same amount of sun that, that Fairbanks gets. And pretty much at the same times. So the only reason that they're doing it and being successful with it, like they're doing a bunch of residential programs and have a lot of incentives, is because they power their systems on gas generators or diesel generators, and they have their cost per kilowatt hour for residential is over 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So they have a large incentive to make these investments, while in Sitka we do not have as much. And there's, yeah, probably there's some other reasons, like we do not have as much open space as Fairbanks has. It's like pretty much flat. But yeah, and then you can see this is kind of an interesting graph on the far left there. You can see that the cost of solar panels, that's the past 10 years. Let's see, it's 2010 to 2021, and it's going down by almost a factor of 3. So it's pretty extremely, or it's getting extremely cheap really quick. And like those solar panels, each of those solar panels is about $100, and they would have been a lot more a long time ago, or not that long ago, sorry. And as you can see, all of these bar graphs are different solar panel installations, and so the higher ones on the left for you are residential applications, and then the lower ones are commercial. So there's a large difference if you do a large installation in solar panels. And then just for fun, the price per gigawatt hour, if you were to somehow get all of the energy generated by that 30 megawatt solar installation, or any solar installation here, if you were able to get the full power of that, the price per gigawatt hour a year that you produce would be $1.5 million at that installation cost, and that's compared to $4.25 million for TechX per gigawatt hour for a year. So even with that flexibility or all that variability, in Sitka, the amount of power you generate is still cheaper than building a new dam if you were to just talk about the power generated and not the usefulness. So this is what that would look like. So that's 190 acres of solar panels. Obviously, that is not what it would look like, but yeah. So that's how much space it would take up. So yeah, there's not a ton of spots in town where we could fit that in, but still, a lot of places, like a lot of towns like the Fairbanks, they're doing residential solar where it's grid tied, so you're selling the energy that you're not using back to the city utility. And that wouldn't be super worthwhile in Sitka because our utilities are, we're not paying for diesel, we're paying off our dams. So all the money that we are not spending on paying off our dams through money through our utilities is kind of lost revenue. So doing a grid-tied system is not super worthwhile here, but in the future, if we do start dipping into diesel generators, it could be very much worth it. Okay, and also where solar could come in handy is I was talking to the power plant operator, the senior power plant operator. I spent like kind of like half a day talking to him, and one of the things we talked about is like what it would look like if Sitka did come to this place where we ran out of power that we could generate, and like what when that would be and kind of what it would look like. And basically, it would be around April, like kind of March, April area. What he thought, at least, is it would be around March, April area, right when the when the herring fishery happens, and that would be a large load, and then we would come to the low point of our reservoirs where we cannot keep on drawing from them and be sustainable for the next year. And so at that point, that also coincidentally is right when our solar radiance from the sun comes in and gets the highest. Well, I guess it's not technically the highest, but it's where it starts to ramp up. And an interesting thing about Sitka is, so in the winter, you can see we have like virtually no solar radiance. But in the summer, we actually have a decent amount for a place that you wouldn't think has very much. Like for some context, Los Angeles has around 7 kilowatt hours. So this is kilowatt hours per meter squared per day. And so, so Los Angeles has around 7. So even though we're not there, we still have long daylight hours, and we have a surprising amount of sun, more than you'd think, in the summer. And so we can actually generate a decent amount of solar power in the summer. And so that could come in handy because our lakes are basically large batteries. Like everything we don't draw from the lakes is being stored in a reservoir and can be used later. So if we came to a spot where we needed to stop, so this is the rule curves for Blue Lake and Green Lake, and you see how the water level goes down kind of mid-year, and that coincides pretty much perfectly with the rise in solar generation. So we could pretty much, if we had the right system, cut that rule curve and keep that water that we'd otherwise be pulling out of the dam. And so we could possibly have more work with. So other renewables, there's a lot of different renewable technology right now. So wave energy, a lot of people have been very interested in wave energy over the past few years, and it seems super cool, and there's a ton of possible places where you think like, oh my gosh, there's so many waves here, and we can totally do this. But unfortunately, as of now, wave energy, like kind of the people who are working on it say that wave energy is where wind and solar were 20 years ago. So right now there are no viable commercial applications. Like I was watching a video today and they were like, yeah, like one place in Australia sold to a municipality like some of their energy, and that was like a big feat. So it's not quite where wind and solar are, and so especially in such a remote place like Sitka, it is a long ways out. But it definitely could be a possibility in the future. And Cora Christensen made this again, and he pointed out in front of York as a possible location. And then geothermal, as of now, there are new technologies coming out that will possibly tap into geothermal power virtually anywhere. But as of now, we need pretty much direct access to some kind of geothermal vent. And the closest really feasible one, I guess, is Goddard. And I'm not sure entirely how feasible that is. But that's what has been laid out, and that's very far from town. And another large takeaway from this is transmission lines cost a lot of money. So building a transmission line to Goddard would be a lot of money. So that is not super feasible. And then tidal energy, you need basically a large tidal reservoir for the stuff that exists now. Like that, there are some technologies that use the up and down motion of the tide, but most of what is used now uses the flow into reservoirs when the tide is high, and then that flow out to power a turbine. And the only really great place for that in town would be Thoroughfare, which is pointed out on this map, which that could be possible, but it's not a huge reservoir, and I'm not sure if people would want a massive turbine in the middle of Thoroughfare either, but it's there. Yeah, that's other stuff. And then hydrogen and ammonia. So again, Ford Christensen is super interested in this stuff, and I think a lot of people at the city are getting more interested in this. And it is definitely interesting. So basically, hydrogen and ammonia are biofuels, or not biofuels, they're carbon-free fuels, and they're produced pretty simply from using basically air and water. So hydrogen you can just do through electrolysis by basically electrocuting water, and it will separate into separate parts, and you can get the hydrogen from it. And then ammonia is a little bit more complex process, but you can take nitrogen from the air and then make ammonia, and both these processes are around 30% efficient. So if we were to use, kind of the thought process here is we use the excess power that we're currently putting over the dam, like all that green on that first graph that I showed you, that's currently just flowing over the dam unused, and we use that for producing these biofuels that we could later on use in a turbine, like our diesel turbines that we have now, or just a generator. Like I think they actually have reciprocating generators that run off of hydrogen that they're making right now, and we could use that just as our generation to supplement our hydroelectric power. And that would be very nice, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be kind of figured out before that happens. And even then, if we could do it, if we had a 30% efficiency making it, then we have a lot of losses, because you also have losses while you're turning that back into electricity on the other end. So, and they do not have carbon emissions, but ammonia produces nitrogen oxides, which are extremely harmful to humans when burned. And they do have systems to get rid of a lot of that problem. But, and then hydrogen needs to be stored at negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit and around 1,000 psi. So there are definitely some limitations and some interesting things that would need to be figured out for hydrogen and ammonia. But they are both very much upcoming technologies. So yeah, and then other options of just energy conservation, like heat pumps are, that's one of the coolest things that I've realized so far, is heat pumps are really cool. Like just how heat pumps work is just pretty crazy. Like you basically just get free heat from the outside air, or if you have a ground source heat pump, just the ground, or water source, just the water. Like there's just a lot of heat that you don't realize is, or energy within heat that's just surrounding you, even when you feel like it's crazy cold outside. Like you can see on this graph on the far left, you can see that, so that's the coefficient of performance. And so 1 would be just normal resistance heating, and even at negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit, an air source heat pump is above 1 for a coefficient. And so they can get a remarkable amount of free heat basically from the air, and they can be over 300% efficient at normal temperatures. And then ground source heat pumps, that's if you have like a larger installation that you're doing, like if you're doing for, say, a large hospital, you could do a ground source heat pump, and that would be a lot more efficient, and yeah, would save you a lot of money over the long term compared to heating with other means, even especially resistance and diesel heating. So also other things, LEDs, obviously, that's pretty simple. I think a lot of people, it's like now it's financially worthwhile to do it, so that's pretty obvious. And then proper insulation can make a huge difference. Our house is not a great example of that, but who cares? I guess, yeah, proper insulation can save a crazy amount. And replacing, so this is from the Future of Energy in Sitka, report replacing all resistance heaters in Sitka with heat pumps could save 8 gigawatt hours per year. So in some context, that's a fourth of the Blue Lake Dam expansion. So if we could, a lot of money could be saved if we just make our houses more efficient and switch to heat pumps instead of resistance like baseboard heating and stuff like that. Then we can eliminate the need for building a lot of new infrastructure to generate electricity. Yep, I think the term is the negawatt that people have coined. It's like megawatt that you don't have to save, or you don't have to spend because you're saving it. And then going on to what I have been doing, so small scale solar. So basically, solar on a smaller scale will never really be worth it compared to the city utility. Oh, I'll back up a little bit. So solar on a small scale basically is worth it for systems that aren't going to be connected to the grid, and systems like if you have an island or if you have a boat or stuff like that that are otherwise using a generator or alternators on an engine. Yeah, I guess I had that as a second bullet point or whatever. So that's, they actually, solar panels in Sitka are surprisingly useful, as I talked about earlier. And small generators have the high costs that I was talking about earlier with our diesel generation, except smaller generators can be easily 60 cents per kilowatt hour because they don't have the, they're not quite as efficient as the large ones that we have. So a small generator at current gas prices can be, 60 cents per kilowatt hour. I don't think that's actually current gas prices. I think that's like $3 a gallon or something. So it's a lot more now. And solar, the cost for the system that I made is around 17 cents over its warranty life, which is 25 years. So that's actually right around what the city produces, except the likelihood of you getting the entire useful energy out of those panels, as I said, is quite unlikely unless you have a ton of batteries, and batteries are quite expensive. And so compared to a gas generator, a $500 system can save $1,200 over its life if you use it to its full extent. And batteries are the largest cost. For my system, I went to Napa where they have a large amount of battery recycling stuff where people will drop off their batteries. I went a few times and tested the batteries and talked to the guy who runs Napa. And I asked him basically, like, if I bring in new battery cells, can I get some of these old ones that people have thrown away that are actually perfectly fine? And he said, yeah. And so I've gotten, like the current batteries that are on my system right there are worth over $1,000, and I got them for free. And they output exactly what they're rated for and work great. So stuff like that can definitely help when you're building a solar system. And then, conclusions just on all this in general, all of our renewable energy. So we've been set up with a pretty incredible electrical system by our previous generations, as I talked about in the beginning with Green Lake. We've got just a really incredible system that it's hard to realize, or sometimes you don't realize that like the rest of the United States is pretty much completely reliant on fossil fuels. Like there's a lot of fossil fuels. I think it's only like 15% renewable in the lower 48. And we are incredibly lucky that we have been set up with, it would be quite easy for people to just keep on paying the prices of diesel instead of going on and kind of taking the leap and spending the extra money and for the long-term happiness of everyone after them. And so Sitka is one of only a dozen towns in the U.S. that I could find that run entirely on renewable energy as far as their electrical grids go. And that's pretty remarkable, except, or not except, oh, and I'll say something else too. Sitka is also special because we have a microgrid. So we have, our entire grid is localized to our island. We are our own system and we produce all of our own electricity. So because of that, we don't have problems like in Texas, how their entire grid shut down because I think it was linked to some wind power or something like that, but it was in one place and then it shut down their entire, or a large part of the grid. We don't have problems like that because we aren't connected to other places. But at the same time, we kind of are out of luck if something does go wrong. But that being said, yeah, we are fully self-sustainable, which is pretty cool. But we still have a long ways to go. So with, as I said earlier, only roughly 25% of what we use as hydroelectric power is the full energy that we are importing into our town. Like we still have a long way to go if we want to fully remove carbon dioxide emitters from our town. And we are currently at the crossroads where we need to kind of make that decision, like if we're going to build another large project or kind of give in for a little while and pay diesel prices and kind of prolong the inevitable. And that would be at the detriment of pretty much all of us if we let ourselves pay for diesel that's not going to get us anywhere and it's just going to cost more money. So at a certain point, we kind of are going to have to bite the bullet on something and do what our previous generations have done and set ourselves up for the future with whatever type of renewable energy or new investment we choose. And technology is changing quickly too. So like there's a lot of stuff that seems incomprehensible now that will be probably mainstream in the next 10, 20 years. So there's a lot of new opportunities coming quick as far as technology goes. And we're at an awesome spot. Like we've got an awesome electric department, we've got an awesome community, and we can totally do it. Like we can be like the poster child renewable city if we want. Yeah, and that's about it. Thank you.
Your ratio on the penstock where you said we're at 14 and then we'd be at 15, and then with the max capacity at 29 megs, that doesn't make sense to me. How much are we reducing flow? We raised the dam 90 feet, but we got to reduce it because the penstock wasn't lined, and you said we're only going to gain like 7% more. I'm just confused on that ratio. How does that line out as far as, a smart investment for the future?
Oh yeah, so that was something I should added some more information on that. So when we installed our dam, we have these turbines that we can, we installed, I believe, 8.3, Dean might know this exactly, but I think 8.3 megawatt turbines. And so we have 3 of those turbines that can be expanded to that much. So if we want to run those turbines to the full extent, so if we have a large draw that we want to run solely on Blue Lake, then we could do that if we have a penstock that we can draw more water through. And we could also, it also would not be a ton of money, I don't believe, and it would just kind of secure our system more, so we don't have our power plant operator was saying, when he hears rocks going through there, it like rattles the whole thing. It's just kind of on their nerves, I guess, a little bit. So it would be less stress for them overall too. Yeah.
Did you just say that we'd add 2/3 by lining the penstock?
Not necessarily. So that's how much we could generate. So we technically, we could draw that power, but right now we don't need to. This is kind of the situation. Like right now, we're not drawing that much from Blue Lake at one time. Because if we drew even like the 14 megawatts from Blue Lake for a long period of time, then it would draw that like pretty quick. So we don't necessarily need to do that. Yeah, it's a little, all this stuff is kind of complex and like has to do with like very specific times when we'll need to draw this much power, and yeah, it's all kind of interdepending.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions?
Did you say we're only using 25% to provide BTUs?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know, like when the city gave away heat pumps and then raised the price of kilowatts, there's no, how much, if we're buying our 25% of the use, but we're getting BTUs out of absorbing heat from the air, and then how many more homes in Sitka are burning fossil fuels? You know, like where's the growth in that? How successful was the borough in giving away air-to-air heat pumps so they could raise the price and get the $8 million a year paid for?
Well, so basically, I think the city did that on a large part to kind of transition to, well, kind of twofold, like to transition to more efficient stuff for the people who have resistance heating, but also for the people so we could use less CO2 emissions. So I don't believe it was entirely a plot to get money out of citizens, but still there is a lot of efficiencies that are gained when we switch to that heat pump systems. So basically, the amount of BTUs that we're using for heating ends up being a lot less when we use a heat pump.
No, I got all that. What I'm trying to get, you're buying a kilowatt, and how many BTUs are you getting out of it? Never mind, that's all right.
Where are you gonna go to school, Asa, and what are you gonna study?
I'm going to Dartmouth in New Hampshire, and I'm planning on studying engineering.
When are you coming back to run the electric car?
Yeah.
Corey did offer me an internship next year, but I don't know if we'll get into that. Yeah. Awesome. So any other questions, or all good?
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, okay. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank
have a
you.
good night.